Alright, so today I want to cover 8 ball python morphs that are known by more than one name for that specific morph. And I'd say it gets a little bit confusing. Essentially what happens is more than one person discovers a brand new ball python morph pretty much at the same time. They introduce it to the hobby and they name it 2 different names, and then they find out a little bit later on that it's actually the same ball python morph, and instead of dropping one or the other names, they keep both names, and you end up with a system that's a little bit confusing. And I've actually seen one example where there's 3 different names for the same ball python morph, and a lot of these are interchangeable. And some people buy into a project not knowing that they've already bought into it under a different name for the same morph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually jump over to the internet and I want to show you 8 of these amazing morphs that are known by more than one name. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the Coral Glow ball python. This is what a Coral Glow looks like, and I would say it's kind of deceiving. I actually bought into the Coral Glow project, one of my very first ball pythons. It was kind of amazing. I actually looked for the brightest and most intense Coral Glow that there was on Morphmarket, and then when I got it in the mail and unboxed it, I looked at it and it kind of looked like this. I was like, wait a minute, did you send me the right snake? I thought they sent me the wrong snake. And come to find out, when a Coral Glow hatchling is small, it's a lot more brighter and intense. It has, I'd say, some more yellows and oranges, maybe some purples in there, and then as it grows it kind of loses a lot of the colors and starts getting this freckling through it. And if you actually take a look at the banana, this is almost pretty much exactly the same as the Coral Glow. A lot of people assume that it is the same line. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people over here, when they sell one of these, they'll actually name it as a Coral Glow / banana and actually put both genes into the genes on Morphmarket so people can search for it. But I would say it's probably good to keep the lines separate. And the interesting thing is even though my Coral Glow has aged and matured, kind of browned out a little bit and got some freckles on it, all the hatchlings are really super bright and intense. It's almost deceiving, because a lot of people come up to my table and they want to buy one of these snakes, and I always tell them, yeah, the snake, the color that the snake is, it's going to change a little bit and it's going to get some freckles and a lot of the, especially the oranges, and sometimes the background color has a little purple hint to it, like a purple hue. A lot of times it'll lose a lot of those colors, but it produces some amazing hatchlings. So another thing I wanted to show you is the supers on a lot of these morphs. So this is the super Coral Glow, and a lot of times the super can tell you if it's actually the same gene or not. There's a lot of genes out there that are really close, but if you actually produce the supers on both of the genes, you can actually tell there's a significant difference between the 2 different genes. So this is actually the super Coral Glow, and you compare that to the super banana, pretty much the same thing. It's interesting, in this case the super is actually, it almost looks like the single copy gene, just the one copy of the gene. And keep in mind, if you actually have the super with 2 copies of the gene, if you actually bred this to something else, all the hatchlings would come out as Coral Glow / bananas, versus if you just had 1 copy of the gene, half the babies would come out Coral Glow or banana. It's a codominant morph. So another one I want to show you here is the lesser. A lot of people consider the lesser and the butter the same, and it's kind of interesting. I was searching through the internet trying to find some snakes that were pretty close to each other, and a lot of these different genes, there are a lot of differences. There's the slight differences between the different lines of just about any gene in ball pythons. That's when it can get a little bit confusing. So this is the lesser, and you compare that one to the butter, you can see it's pretty much the same thing. And the super lesser and the super butter are blue-eyed leucistics. If you take a look at the super lesser, it's an all-white snake with blue eyes. And kind of the interesting thing about the super lessers is that they have eyes that are slightly bigger than a normal ball python. Some people say they're a little bit bug-eyed. I've actually seen, bigger or, almost normal-looking eyes on the super lesser. It really depends on the snake. Some of them are really super big and look kind of almost alien-like. And if you take a look at the super butter, this is a super butter. You can tell the eyes are maybe just a little bit bigger, but it's definitely the same morph, just 2 different lines of the same gene. Here's another one that's a little bit confusing. It's pretty new on the market. This is the static, and the static is the same as the acid. This is the acid, and that is the same as confusion. It's 3 different genes, and a lot of people are considering it to be exactly the same snake. And if you take a look at this pretty much from the beginning, it's almost like a reduced pattern. The only thing that I can really come close to as far as another ball python morph, as far as comparing it to this one, I would say that would be the leopard. The leopard is probably the king of combos, works really well to break up the pattern on a lot of the combinations that you mix it with. And I'd say the static is kind of like leopard on steroids, really explodes the pattern, makes for some really interesting combos. And then the acid is pretty much the same thing, like a reduced pattern. And then the confusion, pretty much all 3 of these have a unique characteristic that you can tell them apart from all other genes, and that is the belly of the snake. So if you actually take a look at the belly has a really crazy pattern on the belly for the acid, static, and confusion. And it's pretty much, I've seen a lot of people where they breed it into a lot of their different genes, and to figure out which one is which, to see if you have one of these genes in the mix, you look at the belly of the ball python. If there's a lot of pattern, kind of crazy pattern all in the belly, that's pretty much a sure sign that you have one of these genes in the mix. As a matter of fact, these are all pretty much brand new to the market. I haven't seen any photos of any supers yet of any of these. So keep in mind, you have to actually grow up the females and then breed the males back to the females to get the supers. So this is the Mystic, and the Mystic, I would say, is pretty close to a normal ball python. I'd say you'd probably have a hard time differentiating between the Mystic and a normal. It's really close to the Phantom. You can see there's a little bit going on in the mix here. Mixes really well with a lot of different genes. And here I really want to focus on the Super Mystic versus the Super Phantom. So if we come over here and take a look at this, this is the Super Mystic. Makes for a really awesome snake. It's pretty, I'd say this one almost looks like it's going into shed a little bit. They're usually a little bit brighter than this. And then this one is the Super Phantom, and you can definitely tell by the supers that these are definitely probably, I'd say, you know, a lot of people say, you know, sometimes there's slight differences. Some people will say, yes, they're different genes, and a lot of people actually in these 2 genes will actually say, yes, they are actually the same gene. So here's another one. This is actually what we consider a dinker ball python. And a dinker, I would say the dinker is probably close to, you know, a normal. I'd say 95% of the cases, a dinker is just an unusual patterned normal. And when we talk about dinkers, it's kind of interesting because dinker is actually a morph over here on Morphmarket. You can actually search for dinkers. And what it is people look at this and they're like, that is a crazy pattern, unlike any normal that I've ever seen. I think there's something in there. There might be a new gene, and that's why we call it a dinker or a dinker project, maybe some new gene in there. And if you compare that to a normal, this is like a classic normal wild type. I would say in probably in 99.9% of all cases, a dinker is the same thing as a normal, unless you get really lucky. Sometimes you can actually take a dinker and then prove it out and get some really awesome stuff. Sometimes it's a gene you're just not familiar with, and sometimes it could be a brand new gene. And a lot of people, that's as a matter of fact, that's where the acid came from. You know, someone was looking at dinker projects, looking for something unique, and then they proved out the acid morph, and then they named it, and that's kind of how things get discovered. People are looking at dinker projects. It's kind of interesting. I actually have one dinker project that I have in my collection. Looks like, you know, some snakes I've seen on Morphmarket. Just not familiar with the morphs, or it could be a new gene. You just never know with dinkers. So here's another one. I actually just want to jump right into this one, into a mix, and that is a gene you probably haven't heard about before. As a matter of fact, I haven't really worked with this much, and I just kind of stumbled on it when I was looking for genes that were the same, and that is the Goblin. As a matter of fact, a lot of people are saying Goblin is the same as yellow belly, and probably the first thing that struck me as, you know, being yellow belly. Yellow belly is a really subtle morph. Hard to tell the difference between a yellow belly and a normal. But if you mix it with asphalt or gravel, you get the freeways and the highways. So that's what I was thinking at first. I wonder if there's a Goblin combo with one of those jeans, the asphalt or the gravel. And sure enough, this is the pastel Goblin asphalt. Pretty awesome combo. And it's this is actually called this would actually be called the pastel freeway, because the yellow belly, well, it would actually be the yellow belly asphalt would be the freeway. So this is like the pastel Goblin asphalt. It's kind of an interesting combo because I've never really heard of it. And I was pretty shocked to actually find this snake over here on Morphmarket. And if you compare that to where you switch the Goblin with the yellow belly, and this is what you get, the pastel, it's a pastel freeway. And the interesting thing about the pastel freeways is I believe there's a lot of different lines of pastel, a lot of different lines of yellow belly, and different lines of asphalt. So when you mix all those three together, you get some really different results. When you're talking about pastel freeways, I've never really seen two that look similar. They're all slightly different as far as the amount of yellows and whites and the amount of pattern in there, unless they're pretty much from the same line or from the same clutch. I've seen some pretty big differences, but you can see back and forth between these two. I would say definitely Goblin is equivalent to yellow belly. Here's another one. This is Calico. I actually have some Calico in my collection. I produce some awesome bamboo calicos. Bamboo and Calico works really well, pretty awesome. And also works really good with spider. You get some really awesome combos. And essentially what Calico does is it brings up a lot of the white on the sides of the snakes. And there's different degrees of Calico. There's different lines. Some of them just have a little bit of white. Some of them I've actually seen the white coming all the way up to the top ridge of the snake. And believe it or not, Calico is the same thing as sugar. Here is a sugar. And if someone handed me that snake, I would say, yeah, that is a Calico. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of these jeans, I'd say sugar, there's not a lot of people working with sugar compared to Calico. Most people would just call it a Calico. Pretty much two different lines of the same thing. So here's another one that's a little bit confusing as well. This is actually a Toffee. Toffee is actually the same as candy. So this is a Toffee. Compare that to a candy. And essentially what it is, it's a different line of albino, slightly different than albino. And I just pulled up an albino because I want you to see the difference between this morph and the albino. This is an albino. It's a bright yellow and white snake. Really awesome. I produce some albinos. They always just fly off the shelves. People love the albinos. It's stunning. And the funny thing about albino is if you actually breed an albino to a Toffee or a candy, it's actually compatible. So you get one copy of the albino, one copy of the Toffee or the candy. So essentially what you get is you get a Toffino or a Candino, which is like half Toffee and half albino. I'd say the Toffinos and the Candinos are equivalent, pretty much the same thing. The Toffee and the candy is the same thing. And the interesting thing is when you hatch out the candies and the Toffies with the albinos, from what I've heard, they actually almost look identical to the albinos when they're younger, and then as they grow up and mature, they quickly turn into kind of a more purplish background. And when you mix the two together, you get Toffinos and Candinos. Essentially what it is they all start looking like this. So you'll get albinos and you'll get Candinos, for example, and they'll all look the same when they hatch, and as they start maturing, they'll start getting a more and more purplish background to the snake, and not quite as purple as quickly as some of the pure male, the pure candies or pure Toffinos. It'll kind of develop a little bit slower. The purplish color in the background won't quite get as purple as this. I thought it was kind of an interesting morph. I was actually looking at the Toffinos and the Candinos, didn't realize at the beginning that they were actually the same snake. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Ace Mackin asks, Is there a particular time of day that's better to handle a ball python? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, I handle most of my ball pythons late in the evening because keep in mind, ball pythons are nocturnal. Although I would think you could handle a ball python any time of day. They pretty much, when you open up the tub or go into their enclosure, a lot of times you can wake them up and handle them no problem. It's not really an issue for a snake, won't really stress them out. Although most of the work I do here in my reptile room is in the evenings, especially if you're feeding your ball python. I found if you're trying to feed them early in the morning or early in the afternoon, a lot of times a lot of ball pythons won't actually eat, versus if you feed them late at night, sometimes all the way at midnight, you can actually get a lot more of your ball pythons to eat. And you know, ball pythons are kind of picky, so you're always looking for tricks to try to figure out when, you know, how can I feed my ball python? And a lot of it comes down to the time of day. But as far as handling, I would imagine you can handle your ball python any time of the day. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.